in Auckland as other places. We can see what we can do in the time frame, but I probably can't add a huge amount more.
But is that suitability for people with disabilities, or is it suitability for people that are elderly, or is it suitability, who's it suitable for? But it's just the word suitability really leaves me feeling that it's a bit ambiguous. Far be it from me to suggest changes to the wording that the chair is suggesting here. I think that there may be a way of directing officers to undertake work to establish, whether it's correct or not, I don't know. I just feel I'm really struggling to think that that's going to address the concerns that I've had.
So if I can just come in there, Councillor Fletcher. The staff are still going through a lot of the submissions, and they'll be picking up points from those submissions, and we could narrow it down right now, or we could keep it a little bit open so that we can actually be flexible and be able to respond to the further things that pop out from the staff's analysis of the submissions. I actually think we've got plenty of room there, and we're giving the staff plenty of room to explore a few different options there, rather than having a narrow analysis. I'm comfortable with it.
I'm not wanting to be vexatious about it, but it just, and I really want to support this. And that's why I asked how the interpretation of this would be undertaken by the officers. If we pass this today at a governance level, how are they going to interpret this? And will it meet the work that I wish to have undertaken, which might be different to the work that other councillors might want undertaken? So I guess I'm just really wanting to drill it down and do a deep dive to make sure that I have the comfort in knowing that the concerns that have been expressed by people, perhaps a bit belatedly, are being incorporated.
Okay, thank you. I think we just need to leave that there. I appreciate the feedback that you're giving. Now, there's no other questions on this section. I'm going to hand back to you now, John, and you're going to take us on.
Apologies. The last topic, and it's really split into two parts. There is the all qualifying matters except special character areas, and then I'll be handing over to Noel and I think Megan Tyler as well to talk you through the recommendations on special character areas. So putting that to the side for the moment, qualifying matters, as you'll recall, these are the reasons that a council might use to have lower heights and densities than would otherwise be required under the NPSUD. And then when the changes were made to the Resource Management Act last year, that whole the concept of qualifying matters also applies. Apologies. Sorry. Chair. Yep.
Sorry. Senior Governance Advisor has just advised me that we need to move an extension of time motion to the close of business. So that is the close of our business on the agenda. Moved by Councillor Walker. Do I have a second, please? Deputy Mayor. All those in favour, please say aye. 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 To the contrary, please say no. The motion is carried. Sorry to interrupt, John. Back to you.
All right. So when aspects of the NPSUD were essentially incorporated into the Resource Management Act, that the concept of qualifying matters now appears in primary legislation, not just the NPSUD. And so we've got the sections of the Resource Management Act that now talk about qualifying matters. So and they're categorised into two groups, as you've heard before. And as we put out in the public consultation as well, there are ones that we would say are pretty much government identified. They're listed in the NPSUD and the changes to the RMA as pretty clear reasons why the heights and densities might be inappropriate, on a particular property or in a particular location. And then the Resource Management Act, under the sections there and also in the NPSUD, allow a council to identify any other matter that isn't listed as a reason why heights and densities might be tempered, reduced compared to what would otherwise be required. So in terms of the council identified qualifying matters, going right back to, July, I think it's July 2021, not 2022, apologies. Oh no, sorry, this is the updated version, right, okay. Hold on a second, slides might have, apologies, that should say July 2021. We're not in July 2022 yet. So you endorse things that are already in the unitary plan that do restrict height and density, and they're not ones that are specifically identified by the government. So the government identified ones would be things like historic heritage, significant ecological areas, areas of significant natural hazards like coastal areas that are subject to flooding or erosion. So those are the sorts of things that, that we would say are in the unitary plan already, and they're government identified, and they're in the legislation and in the MPSUD. But you've previously agreed that the ridgeline protection overlay, which just applies to a small number of places, mostly in the western part of urban Auckland, would continue on as a qualifying matter and essentially roll over into beyond August. The Auckland War Memorial View Shaft overlay in the unitary plan that restricts heights between the museum and the Waitemata Harbour would continue on as a restricting height and density in some places. We've got some local public views in the Auckland Unitary Plan that came from the Legacy Manukau City Centre. There are 2 of 3 of those that we've had landscape architects go out and have a look at them, as we're required to do, because for all of these we need the evidence that they're still valid reason to constrain height and density. So we do have some ongoing work in terms of a couple of those local public views. We'll bring that to you as soon as we can, and certainly bring it to you in August as to where that one lands. The Stockhead Hill View Shaft, which was a Auckland Council control introduced to the unitary plan in the Howick area, is proposed to be carried over. All of the notable trees, so we've got 6,500, I think, protected trees in the Auckland Unitary Plan. They will continue on having protection and having some impact on density of housing development. We get into special character areas, which I'll skip over. We've got an approach to the airport that restricts height for pretty obvious reasons. That one there was identified as a council qualifying matter by you back in July. It's probably one that sits more in the government identified ones, because the airport is nationally significant infrastructure, so it's possibly in the wrong place, but that's not a, in terms of this list. The fact is, or the main point is that we need to continue to restrict heights in the approaches to the airport, which probably doesn't have a huge impact on height and density at all, given where it sits and residential under it. But anyway, character buildings in the city centre. So I think there was a question before around what other qualifying matters are in the city centre. So we do have groups of some character buildings in the city centre and also in the Queen Street Valley precinct that we are proposing to continue on as a qualifying matter. We've got the sunlight controls that Elizabeth ran through in considerable detail. We did have this category of natural hazards that are less than significant, because the government listed ones that use the phrase significant natural hazards. So we just wanted a placeholder there in case there was some hazard that you couldn't say is significant, but I don't think we've identified anything. If it's a hazard, we're saying it's significant. So that's probably fairly redundant. And 11 areas of long-term significant infrastructure constraints. So that's what you resolved last July. But as we said at that time, we really were grappling with how on earth to apply constrained development based on infrastructure, given the way that the NPSUD was written at that time and rolled into the Resource Management Act. We've got the same tests for qualifying matters. So the ones that we are recommending to add to the list is, you had a workshop recently on subdivision controls. So in some parts of the urban area, we have restrictions on subdivision for various reasons, including impacts on landscape values, and I think they do tie into infrastructure as well. So we had the workshop. We will be bringing those to you for endorsement formally as part of the IPI on the 4th of August. We've got all the work around the precincts in the Auckland Unitary Plan. That's ongoing work, and as we do that work, we're identifying some qualifying matters that aren't on your or on our list here, and they're not necessarily government ones. So we're just still doing the work, and unfortunately, the time frame means that we're just unable to bring that to you today. But we may be seeking that you ratify additional qualifying matters within these precincts on the 4th of August. You've had a workshop on water and wastewater constraints, and with some great work from Watercare, and we do have some Watercare of the Watercare team online. We will be bringing to you on the 4th of August something very similar to what you saw in the workshop. There are mapped, identified areas of significant water and wastewater constraint that we do believe are justifiable as a qualifying matter, and we have the stormwater soakage area that was mentioned previously by the Albert Eden Local Board in part of that board area, that there are some significant challenges that we believe warrant restrictions on height and density potentially in those areas there. So those will be ones that you've had workshops on 1, 3 and 4, and we will be bringing them to you in the detail on the 4th of August. So we're now on special character areas. So probably
whether we
point
should
to
just
questions.
pause there before we go to special character. I think we probably need to address the amendment to the staff recommendations under I as well, and that is request staff to investigate and advise practicality of identifying transport capacity constraints or other alternative mechanisms, etc. I won't read it all. Now, that's probably not, in part it's for you, so this is Mayor and Chair recommendation. So members, I've heard from a number of us concerns about this. Now, we're being told that paragraph 49, I think it is, 49, that the transport qualifying matter is a difficult one to achieve, but we're being told there could be alternative mechanisms. So there, the Mayor and I are saying we would not like just to stop looking at that. We would like some further work to be done on that, be it arriving at finding a case for qualifying matter for transport infrastructure or alternative mechanisms. Now, John, I don't want to put you in an awkward spot here, but we sort of did cover this before. So maybe if you can just address paragraph 49 and what we've discovered since we first discussed this, when we assumed that we were on solid ground to introduce a QM on transport, and now it appears not.
Thank you, Chair. And we also have Rory Power from Auckland Transport, and I believe Christina Robertson, one of the managers at Auckland Transport online as well, who might be able to add to this. But look, Auckland Transport and ourselves, we look very closely at whether there might be areas that we could map spatially, because that is the requirement for qualifying matter. You have to, it's not just a concept of having qualifying matter, you have to say what are the properties that it applies to, and what is the constraint that is being applied in terms of constraining the 3-storey medium density or less likely the walkable catchment. So because it's not a listed qualifying matter, the government hasn't specifically identified infrastructure as a qualifying matter, infrastructure constraints. It does require a property by property, site by site analysis. And when you look at all of the properties in urban Auckland and try and draw a line as to which property is more transport constrained than the other, it is extremely difficult to pin that down. It's when we think about transport, it's not just congestion. In fact, that might be perhaps not the most significant issue that you might look at for a qualifying matter. It's the walking and cycling infrastructure in that area. It's the public transport accessibility. So how do you sort of factor that all into some sort of model and define spatially where you might have where there might be a case for not enabling the 3-storey medium density residential? And it's just that real challenge of pinning that down at a property by property level, given the statutory requirements. So the paragraph notes the statutory requirements, and they are referenced in previous paragraph, which is paragraph 46. So what are the specific characteristics of each property? If you think about the special character work that's been done and all the site survey work. So property by property, what is the transport constraint? Is the requirement there under 46A. Why does that justify a lower level of density than 3-storey medium density residential? Having done that site-by-site analysis for every property, what are the sites it relates to and what are the sites that it doesn't relate to? Where do you draw the line on a map? What are the specific characteristics of that property that are different to the one next door that isn't constrained? And what are the other options to achieve the greatest heights and densities possible? So if it's not 3-storey medium density, what other provision might apply? So it's been really challenging, but there's still potential to do more of an investigation and workshop with the committee on the 6th of July, whether there might be some possibility of a qualifying matter that could be included in August. So there is potential for that. And there's reference to alternative mechanisms. So as we said at the previous workshop, Auckland Transport have drafted up and put forward, working with our team, an alternative way of potentially dealing with some of the concerns that were raised in the feedback and some of the concerns that the committee might have about the transport implications of the medium density residential.
Okay, look, just following that up. I'm somewhat baffled by the ability to model and network plan your water infrastructure. We say we've got water care and Healthy Waters saying they can do that and they can satisfy the tests, but Auckland Transport can't satisfy those tests. But I'm very aware of the network planning that leads to the development of our network. It's responding to, assessment of need all the time. So can we just bring somebody from Auckland Transport on to, they've given you this advice. Sorry, who is the person that you've got?
I'm just wondering so we have Rory here. Welcome.
Rory, thank you for coming on. So Rory, you may have, I think you have been with us in the last few minutes. This question has, or this concern has been expressed through our workshops, and there are a number of councillors, and it's come back to you, and we've been told it's very difficult to achieve. I want to really understand, what is the difference between how you might network plan and how Watercare might network plan, and why is there this constraint?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if I can comment on how our colleagues at Watercare and others have done their analysis, but from our perspective, the way our sort of high-level strategic transport models work, they aren't necessarily at the site-by-site level required for the analysis required on the MPSUD and the MDRS. They will tell you a modelled area, which doesn't necessarily relate specifically to a geographical area within Auckland, and they can just analyse the transport requirements or constraints of the area. In terms of what John was saying, it's then difficult to assign that area-wide transport constraint to a specific site and then conclude that one site versus another is more or less suitable for development. We have information available, but within the way the legislation is drafted, is potentially difficult to justify. But we are willing to obviously continue to work with Auckland Council staff if the request and recommendation from the committee is to proceed and do further analysis on this matter.
Including the alternative mechanisms which aren't outlined at this stage, but they might come forward at our next meeting?
Yes, and I think it's
in our workshops, actually.
Alternative mechanisms, within the unitary plan or potentially outside the unitary plan. It's fair to say, obviously, central government is trying to constrain some of our planning ability. So potentially there's other alternative mechanisms outside the planning regime that we could utilise to deliver the same outcomes we're seeking.
I'll go to the Mayor. We're both rather exercised on this one.
Yeah, this question may be to John or it could be to Rory, but if you can't have transport as a qualifying matter, how do we deal with the consequences of building large numbers of 3-storey houses, 3 to a section, no parking provided because there's no requirement under government instructions for parking, no walking and cycling facilities, and no access to public transport? Isn't this a recipe for a bloody disaster? It might be a bit rhetorical, that question.
Rory, you don't have to comment on the bloody disaster.
Yeah, I'm saying to you, Rory, I know there's all sorts of complications in making it a qualifying matter, but if you don't, that's what we're ending up with. We're ending up with it right now, and it will only get worse, and the consequences will be horrendous.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree. Yes, it's an issue that we currently grapple with, and these central government changes aren't making it any easier for us to address that problem. It's really a question of whether a qualifying matter is going to deliver that outcome necessarily, whether it's going to be defensible through the hearings process, and whether in practice, as consents come forward, we're going to be able to hold the line. We can obviously, we can go back and we can look at it and we can put our best foot forward. We've obviously just highlighted any potential risks around that approach.
Yeah, please do your best, because if we can't do anything in this area, I mean, we'll spend a lot of time on special character areas in a moment, but my worry is predominantly at what the impact of the medium density housing standards will do to our lower income areas in our outlying suburbs. You know, all of the well qualified and well off people in the world will make big submissions on special character areas, but actually I'm talking about ordinary New Zealanders that are living in areas where we're going to create housing that won't be fit for purpose for the future.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, we're going to have a workshop on this. John, what was the date for that?
6th of July.
6th of July, and we'll be considering it again once Rory and others have done further work. Are there further questions? So we know that what the work is happening. Are there questions that might help clarify what the work would entail? I'd better follow the list, and it's Councillor Stewart next, please.
Thank you, John. I actually told John that I'd be asking this question again. I did ask it through the confidential part of it. John, you know that I'm concerned about that planning's doesn't seem to be responsible for this, what I think should be a qualifying matter, that if you bring it down a little bit, we can see H. Let's note that additional qualifying matters relating to locations with significant water supply constraints will be presented to the Planning Committee for endorsement on the 4th of August. One of the things that I'm quite concerned about is that during the lockdown, we actually had a fire out in Flatbush, and the fire service had great difficulty going down a very long driveway, which had all sorts of corners and everything like that, and a lot of houses down that driveway, they couldn't even get water from the hydrant. It was really, you know, quite serious. So that I believe is a qualifying matter, and I know that you did say that planning isn't part of that. Is you don't believe that that's part of the qualifying matters, that it's really a building consent. But I believe that these subdivisions, and these subdivisions only went in reasonably recently, I think that they should be a qualifying matter, and I think it's something that really does need to be addressed. So we've got these long driveways, and so I'm very concerned about that, and that we have a lot of these properties don't even have hydrants that can be reached by the fire service. We've also got emergency services that are trying to get down there. Somebody's had a heart attack, trying to get down there, bit of a struggle. So that's one of the questions, but just one other question that I'd like to, just another qualifying matter, and I just want to thank you, first of all, that Stockade Hill seems to be okay at the moment, and I want to thank Mr. Reardon. I believe you've probably had a little bit to do with that, but just, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Crawford Reserve, that was in 1900 to 2002, that was actually the old bus depot and then a car yard. And in 2002, we have Councillor, who's just departed, Councillor Ken Yee and myself, along with Sir Barry Curtis, we purchased that site because at one stage it was going to be a 12-storey apartment block, and that was back in 2002. So I think it was around about 2006 the deal was done. We ended up purchasing what is now called the Crawford Reserve. And for any of you that have been to Howick, it is the most magnificent view as you go into Howick from Ridge Road into Picton Street. I really feel that because Manukau Council, at that time, the main reason we purchased that Crawford Reserve was to protect the views from Stockade Hill and coming down Ridge Road into Picton Street. So I would hope that we can tack that onto the Stockade Hill view, because it would be, you know, so that I'm just pleading with you. So
Can we focus on this particular section for now?
Well, that's a qualifying matter as well.
Yeah, okay, there's quite a bit bundled there, so we've got,
It's a little bit, but
we've got the
I've
further
just got
work
my
on
opportunity to
the
do it, so I want to
stormwater.
do it. Thank you.
John, did you want to respond to, we're doing the work on the stormwater, we're going to be socialising that at a workshop, and we'll be confirming it at a meeting. In reference to the Stockade Hill, that's already identified, but I think the councillor was referring to an extension of that, which I'm not familiar with. Can you cover that?
Well, thank you, Chair. I think it'd be good to meet Councillor Stewart afterwards and talk through the specifics of that. What I will point out is that we can't, as part of this intensification planning instrument in August, put in place a new restriction that isn't already in the unitary plan. We can only sort of roll over existing restrictions as qualifying matters, but we can't introduce something new that would restrict development potential. That would have to be done through a separate plan change with its own justification. But I'm happy to take that offline and have a chat about, what the impacts are on the view of a Crawford Reserve. But certainly Stockade Hill, as you pointed out, the recommendation is to continue that as a qualifying matter. If we can go back to the firefighting issue and the fire in the Flatbush area. So the difficulty there is that, there are two aspects to it. Ensuring that there is adequate water supply in the general area, that is tied into the water care qualifying matter that we've had a workshop on and that we will be recommending, and we have our water care colleague here online if need be to answer questions. So perhaps if I hand over in terms of the water supply issue, but the issue of private driveways and fire vehicles being able to get up driveways and the distance of an apartment or a dwelling from a fire hydrant, that is Building Act territory. And so through the unitary plan, we are not able to have controls in place that are more restrictive than the Building Act. So if the Building Act isn't dealing with it adequately, and we know there's some issues there, that is something that the government has to amend through the Building Act, Building Code. And our regulatory colleagues are certainly onto that and feeding that into the ministry responsible for the building code. But
the question is, can we not make that a qualifying matter?
that does not fit the description of a qualifying matter to have rules around widths of driveways and access. No, and even if it did meet that, there's the requirement to not have anything more restrictive than the building code, dealing with fire, fighting of residential dwellings. It's clearly dealt with in the building code, not the Resource Management Act. But can I just hand over to Priyan?
Kia ora, Priyan, welcome.
Yes, kia ora. So through the chair, just regarding the water supply quantity, as John's described, as part of our approach, we've used the catchment-focused approach to our proposal for qualifying matter, and firefighting supplies is part of our capacity assessment. So where we've identified those areas of potential constraint with the proposed upzoning, we've included that in our assessment. So that detail will be provided on the 4th via those the maps that confirm the areas of constraint, and firefighting capacity is part of that assessment.
Thank you, Priyan. Okay, look, I think before we go to that special character, we need to get all the questions out on everything right up until K. So the J, John, that's in noting. There's further work there. And we'll see the product of that work 4th of August. And then John, the K, not your words but ours, this was raised at a workshop, the question about the transitioning from greater height to lesser height, particularly where it abuts open space and possibly water bodies, and then where you transition from 6-storey, there's an abrupt meeting of there's possibly an abrupt meeting of the zones. Do you want to just cover that for us, please, before we then take questions on everything else in that body that we've just covered?
Certainly, Chair. So within the walkable catchments where we're required to enable 6 storeys, the enable is really enable on a typical site. And a typical site will often be, I can't remember, we've done the analysis in our GIS, but it's probably sitting around, somewhere between 400 and 600 square metres. So, that's the legal requirement under the NPSUD, is to enable 6-storey buildings on fairly small suburban sites. Now, traditionally in the unitary plan and other planning documents, buildings of that sort of scale in a residential area, fairly high density residential area, you would step the upper levels of the building back. But because of the way the NPSUD has been drafted, it really doesn't allow for much stepping back at all. It is, if you have a section of 600 or 800 square metres, then the council must enable on a typical site the 6 storeys. Now, what that results in next to, say, an area of open space is potentially you could have significant overshadowing of a park that's maybe well used, might be quite a small park, but very well used, and certainly in the future might be even more used with that higher density around it. But if that park is on the southern side of multiple 6-storey buildings, it can really undermine the utility of that park. So that's the first point that's of concern. Now, in order for the council to have some sort of step-back requirement for the 3rd, 4th or 5th, 6th storey, that would have to be a qualifying matter. There's no other legal way that we can see that you could have that sort of control in place. And it tips into being a council qualifying matter, so it then has that site-by-site analysis requirement to go along with it, which makes it, a lot of quite a lot of work required there. So we've done some work on this one. We just haven't had the time to sort of bring it to you as a committee. So it wasn't in the recommendations today, but it's been raised by the chair and others. It's been raised in feedback. How on earth is this issue being dealt with? And so we would like to bring that to the workshop on the 6th of July. To sort of talk through where we got to and what might be possible in time for the 4th of August meeting to meet the statutory deadline of 20th of August to have something in place. And the second part of it is really where you might have a 6-storey zone property in a walkable catchment, but there might be a special character area next to it that only allows for 2 storeys. How is that transition being dealt with between the 6-storey on the 600 square metre site next door and the 2 storeys having to be retained for special character reasons? Is there a qualifying matter that can be put into the intensification planning instrument on 4th of August? Again, some initial work has been done, and we'd like to workshop that with you on the 6th of July to see and get your input as to where we might head with these 2 fairly tricky matters.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay, members, we're taking questions now on the qualifying matters up to K. And I think I've got the Deputy Mayor next.
I'll wait to the workshop next week, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I think we cover off then.
And then Mayor.
Okay, thanks for that, John, and your analysis exactly the concerns that the Chair and I had, which is why we've asked for that to go in. And I agree it would have to be a qualifying matter, but if we're able to require areas like Albert Park and Aotea Square not to be overshadowed in the centre of the town, why wouldn't you apply that same principle to a park somewhere out in the suburbs? Or the example you used, you're living in a little 1-storey home and somebody builds a 6-storey building next to you, it's just going to destroy the quality of your life on that property, isn't it? Which is why you'd want to have some transitioning. So if we can make those provisions for transitioning in the centre city, why couldn't we do that in the suburbs?
Thank you, Mayor. Through the Chair, I totally agree with what you're saying there, and the challenge has been, again, it's the time frame to do the site-by-site analysis. So for city centre, Elizabeth and and the team there have been able to sort of look at those special height controls for Albert Park and be able to justify rolling them over. But of course, when you roll that out across the thousands of parks and the thousands of adjacent lower density residential properties, it becomes a lot more of a challenge. So it is this legislative requirement to have the site-by-site analysis that's trickier when you multiply it across the whole of the urban area, not just the city centre. But we believe in principle it should be something to include in the IPI. It's just getting the evidence for that.
So you can't put it in as a principle, you have to have it site by site and identified where you're having the transition. Is that what you're telling me? Which is a lot of work.
That's correct, Mayor. But you know, the definition of exactly what site by site means is something I think we should explore a bit further with you know, our legal team and have that as part of the workshop on 6th of July.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Cooper.
Well, just a quick thing, the airport approach zone, does that include the flight path obstacle zones? Where you can't build in that flight path if they're too high, but also it's around Whenuapai Air Base as well. Did they challenge that in the unitary plan?
Councillor Cooper, the intention is that the restrictions in the unitary plan around whether it's Whenuapai or Auckland Airport, or I think North Shore has some restrictions as well, to roll them over as qualifying matters. Yep. So whether it's restricting heights through the obstacle restriction, I believe also the restrictions on residential development under the high noise areas for Auckland Airport, again, that stays, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hills, please.
Thank you, Chair. The community and and others have been quite vocal on the SEAs. Could you please just describe how we are ensuring the SEAs are still protected or used as a qualifying matter because of the government under the government's qualifying matters? So that's SEAs around our reserves, streams, and other significant areas.
Thanks, Councillor Hills. Significant ecological areas are mentioned in Section 6 of the Resource Management Act as a matter of national importance. So they've been mapped in the Auckland region and they're included in the Auckland Unitary Plan as an overlay. So removing vegetation within that mapped ecological area requires a resource consent. So we believe absolutely that is I guess a government endorsed qualifying matter. But in the Unitary Plan, that overlay of the vegetation, the ecological area, is sort of supported by a lower density residential zoning where the ecological area is on, you know, I think the threshold was 30% or more of the site had the ecological area on it, then we've used the single house zone in the Unitary Plan, the low density zone. So our proposal is to continue on with coupling the mapped ecological area and the controls on vegetation with a lower density zoning. We can't call it the single house zone anymore. We're developing, you know, it's still a work in progress. Unfortunately, we're not able to bring it to you and haven't had time to bring it to you, but a zone similar to single house that as a qualifying matter has protection of ecological areas as the justification for that zoning. So hopefully that's fairly clear. So it's trying to keep us close to the status quo for properties that have a substantial area of SEA, not SCA, but SEA, ecological area on them, as close as we can in the new framework that we have to operate under.
So for that in the coastal inundation zones, we feel like we have enough evidence to protect, you know, our streams, our reserves in those coastal zones with that. I'm just thinking of Leroy's Bush and others, you know, it's been a big concern by many, but we feel like that is going to be enough, interpreting the law that way.
Yeah. Through the chair, we've got great evidence on coastal inundation areas. We've got great evidence on coastal erosion. We've got great evidence on the ecological areas. It really requires the sort of planning evidence to support having the lower density zoning coupled with those overlays. But that's the approach in the Unitary Plan at the moment. And so we believe we've got the evidence to justify that. But clearly that will be contested through submissions, and there'll be some saying, well, you've mapped where the hazard is. Why is there some constraint on the balance of the property? We believe that, you know, there is a good case for that, but it will be tested through submissions, absolutely. Yep. The preliminary response maps showed that lower density zoning essentially being rolled over in those hazardous areas and in the around the ecological areas. And we're still continuing on.
So
with
you
some
feel there's no need for extra resolutions here? You think it's covered in there to protect those SEAs around our really important reserves and streams, etc.?
Through the chair,
It's
I think
covered.
that's starting to get into quite a level of technical detail as to the method of looking after the qualifying matter. So, you know, you've seen in the workshops and the public have seen a preliminary response in terms of zoning to link to those ecological areas and the hazards. And again, on the 6th of July, we'll go through that with you in a bit more detail. And then in August, you know, those maps will be produced on the agenda for August. So I don't believe that drafting some specific thing around the zoning is necessary. That is the direction that we're heading in. It's the direction the preliminary response was heading in, and we'll bring it to you at the workshop on 6th of July and then for your endorsement on 4th of August.
Good.
Thank you. I was just clarifying intent. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Coombe, your question.
Thanks, Chair. My part-time might be more relevant to the next part, but I just wanted to check because it's about the qualifying matters under the RMA 77, whatever it is, and particularly qualifying matter of historic heritage. Should I hold off on that question till the next part?
I think that's probably best to carry that into the next section, is it not, John?
Okay, I know and a yes, but
Yeah.
I think when Noel's up here as our heritage manager, it's probably best in that context.
Yeah, I think so. Do you have that's complete
No,
there?
that's it. That's it.
That's it, good,
Thank you.
okay. Councillor Newman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wondered if Priyan's still on the call. Hi, Priyan, good to see you. I wonder, in relation to a qualifying matter, to what extent you can address wastewater choke points, which are likely to compromise Watercare's ability to comply with the conditions of its network discharge consent. To what extent you can prepare evidence to that effect by the time we notify, and to what extent we can defend the argument against the counter argument that would be, if you give us a consent with the condition that we make a contribution to assist Watercare with its network augmentation, then all of those choke point problems can be dealt with. Priyan, can you comment on that?
Yep.
Through the chair.
Priyan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alf. I'm talking to
Priyan, it's your call. Alf, could you just make sure you're muted,
Sure.
please? Priyan.
Sorry, it's through the chair, and thanks for the question, Councillor Newman. Just regarding the choke points, so our assessment has been at a catchment level. So we do undertake capacity assessments for within catchments for development now, and we've used the same tools and models to assess our restrictions, constraints in our wastewater network as they stand now, and right back through to the our bulk system. So office and connected through our future compliance with the network discharge consent. So I guess to answer your first point around the choke points, the qualifying matter that we've proposed, and then the maps that we'll be talking to on the 4th will have more detail on how we've developed those maps, and they are based on those choke points and potential overflow locations. Just regarding and I don't know if maybe I can answer the second 2 points together. Regarding the level of detail and defence, we have approached it from a catchment level in the first instance, recognising that the test is going to be a site-specific test. So we do have quite a bit of work to be able to prepare our defence from a site-specific perspective regarding this particular qualifying matter. But our approach at this stage from a catchment perspective will carry through to that network and more specific tests. So the defence will require more work and more detail from our more detailed mapping and planning, and we do recognise the complexity of that challenge. But I guess from our perspective, it's an opportunity for us to look and to develop that measure of control in those areas where we do have a potential issue in the future. I guess just to clarify as well, our proposal, there are some time bounds on our proposals as well. So our asset management planning is preparing for upgrade in certain areas where we do have constraints. And over time, there is a sort of, I guess, a temporal element to the nature of the qualifying matter, and that constraint will be addressed over time, but it's just the rate at which that's addressed. I don't know if I answered your question there. Hopefully I did. But yeah, as I say, there will be more detail through the mapping, and the defence will be complicated.
Okay, look, thanks, Priyan. I guess if Megan Tyler is in the room, my follow-up question would be, and it goes a bit wider, but I mean, what I think Priyan served as a good basis for how you could get one infrastructure provider effectively to defend a qualifying matter. What happens when Watercare is swallowed up into the new entity? It's not part of the council family under Three Waters. I mean, does this qualifying matter just hang in abeyance, pending confirmation that this new entity is going to agree that? Or, I mean, Priyan has effectively said it's a temporal matter. These will be addressed over time with infrastructure development, but presumably more connections will create more choke points and new catchments. And the point being that at some point we will need to try and negotiate, amendments to qualifying matters with this new entity that we won't have control of. Megan, can you answer that?
Kia ora, thank you through the chair. Look, that's a great question, and one which I'm not able to answer in any detail. We know there's work that we need to do between, we being nationally, not just in Auckland, between now and when the new entity goes live, around this a connection between, in this case, Auckland Council and its regulatory responsibilities, planning responsibilities, strategic responsibilities that it will retain, and the new water entity, which will own and operate the Three Waters infrastructure. So it's it's a question that's not yet answered, but it's on the table. I don't know when it will be answered, but I agree with you that at some point in time, if something like this is no longer a council responsibility, then it can't be on us, to have the responsibility to action that or something. So something will need to change in the future. I just don't know when, and I'm not sure under what mechanism, whether it's kind of a SLA type, relationship, or whether it'll be legislative.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you,
Satisfied with that response, Councillor Newman?
Or to the extent that they can answer that last question.
Yeah, I know. Thanks, Councillor Newman. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. I was a bit perplexed with the answer to I as well around transport, and I thought maybe it would be helpful if we defined it, giving the intent for the legislation to the practicality of identifying public transport and multimodal, but actually it's the site by site that's the issue. And now listening to Priyan and Watercare are using catchment, but actually will need to get to site specific. So John, when you talk about maybe we need to get some more legal advice on site specific, absolutely for our major infrastructure, I think would be really good for us to get some clarification on that. If this is the way we're going to head, if we're going to have to head down a qualifying matters route for transport, which is an absolute, I mean, these are real, aren't they? So my question was going to be actually around can we redefine it, but having listened to Watercare and Priyan, I think, yeah, can we get some advice on that for all of our major infrastructure? Because site by site is more than a full-time job. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dalton. I think that's well noted, and we'll be picking that up. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, forgive me around transport. We've been building in places with poor transport for 12 years. I know I represent Massey, goodness me. You know, so I get the concern. I think it's a cry for help for investment in infrastructure rather than a serious qualifying matter. And I'm planning to oppose it because I just don't see how we should be spending so much ratepayer time and money on something that I think probably will get tossed out. But I do have a question in here. Thanks, Councillor Walker. Whose fault is it when a place doesn't have easy access to a bus route? Isn't the point of legislation to bring housing closer to transport? And can't we just put more transport options on to meet demand when there's more infrastructure? I don't get it. Can't we just put more bus routes on when we put more housing in? Isn't that the simple
Can you
answer?
answer that, John? Or do you want to go to somebody at transport? John.
I suppose I don't control the purse strings, so that's you know, more bus routes cost more money, and that's not what we do in the planning department. Sorry, that's that's all I can really say. Yeah.
Thank you. Look forward to the next budget, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Walker.
Got a couple of questions, but first off, I'll just make an observation, and that is the buses in my area will just get caught up in the catastrophic congestion because a bus can't move any faster than the network unless there's a bus priority lane. And they don't exist around much of Auckland. A couple of questions. The first question I've got goes to you, John. Given this long list of things that we are not going to have an opportunity to address around qualifying matters, the additional work around walkable catchments, arguably transport issues, all the stuff we're hearing, can we get some kind of list for us as decision makers so that we know the stuff that we simply aren't going to address? Because as you point out time and again, we have these constraints. We just don't have time, we don't have resources. Can we get that list? And part of the reason why I am interested in that list, Mr. Chair, is it informs the whole process. And as far as I am concerned, the whole process, I struggle for the right word. There are a number that come to mind, but I can't utter them. But frankly, it just doesn't stack up. So can I please have that list? If various parts of the organisation can put it together, I'm sure it doesn't involve a lot of time. We're hearing it time and again. The other question I've got is for the Transport Fellow, Rory. I'm assuming Rory's still online?
We had Rory,
yep, there
Rory
he is.
Powell. He is here.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Rory, but my understanding is that we've got a pretty detailed transport model. The transport model plugs in land use analysis. We used to update the land use analysis by consent. So for some decades, it was fairly up to date. The catchments go down to a mesh block level because the model is based on mesh blocks. The mesh block level is actually quite detailed. There's a significant amount of information at the mesh block level by land use. The model can be activated to plug all that data in around the current zoning, which we know because it's built for that, and the additional zoning. My understanding from transport planners I've spoken to is that this is immensely doable and can happen quickly without excessive cost because we already have a very expensive transport model. Yes, it's got deficiencies around walking and cycling, we know that. But as far as public transport is concerned, as far as cars are concerned, we can do it. And as I've asked by way of question, there are communities that I represent, such as Whangaparoa, down in the bays, other parts of Auckland, Beachlands and Devonport and the like, where the transport effects are going to be nothing short of horrific.
Can we go to the question?
So my question is, given that information I'm putting you, why can't we do it?
Well, Rory did respond to that earlier, and I'll give him another go now, but we've got further work. We've got a commitment to do further work. Rory's committed to that. Our Plans and Places team are committed to that. I think we'll thrash that out in the workshop when Rory and others come back. But Rory, brief reply, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yes, as largely what I was going to say, we will come back to you with more detail. Let's work through the issues and let's see if we can come up with a solution that is practical and acceptable to everyone around the table here. I'm committed to doing that.
Mr. Chair, a supplementary question. We may not be able to do it for everywhere, but at the very least, can we deal with those areas where we know there is going to be a severe problem, at the very least?
Okay, we'll take that on board too. Thank you, Rory. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks. So, in respect of point 49, that has been canvassed to a certain extent. I hope Rory's got the message that just addressing the potential effects of larger scale residential developments it isn't going to cut it. Right across my ward and other wards, there's a whole number of big transport infrastructure projects that keep getting deferred, that have been on the books for literally decades. The development has allowed to go ahead unimpeded, and then there's further development that's not just going to is already happening, and there is this future development that's being enabled by all this legislation. So, Mr. Chair, I guess what Auckland Transport are aware of that. They're aware of these projects. They have all the information that is fed into them to justify that to NZTA or whoever co-funds them. So my question to Rory is that existing information, although it doesn't get down to the site-by-site analysis, but certainly goes to that particular network as a starting point, is that planned to be utilised in any fashion through any of this?
Back to you, Rory.
Thank you. Councillor, we'll certainly have to look at utilising every piece of information we have available. Obviously, projects like that and improvements clearly haven't been able to stop development, as you say, up until now. But yes, we are aware of the issues in particular areas, and we need to do whatever we can to try and achieve the right outcomes for transport. And yeah, I'm confident with working with council staff, we can come up with something.
So, Mr. Chair, a question to you, and in light of what we've heard from John Duguid and Rory, at the risk of stating the obvious, we've got a real problem here in terms of the clock ticking. We've got workshops that may or may not address parts of this. This becomes operative on August the 20th as far as the medium density provisions go. What's the council game plan for formally bringing this to the government and, more importantly, the public's attention? I'm attending a whole lot of meetings all around my ward to do with these provisions, and the one question that keeps coming up is to do with transport infrastructure. Where is it? When's this project going to be done? Now, thus far, all I've been able to say is, sorry, we don't really know. After today, I don't really know. I suspect after the workshop, I won't really know, and then it'll be operative. So what is our response to the government and to the public we serve? Because our officers are doing their best. They're not going to be able to cut it. We have a duty to the wider public to at least tell them what's going on. Otherwise, it's all going to come back on the Auckland Council, and it's already starting to do that. Because what the politicians invited along to our meetings are saying is, oh, the council has qualifying matters. It can address this. Yep. So we're going to be the ones that are on the end of the stick with this, not the government.
So in response, the risk of, it's a very real risk of being dealt with dispersed and disconnected development. That was a matter that the Mayor and I raised at the Select Committee. The legislation still went through. So I don't have any doubt the government have heard us, but we're now responding to the legislation. We will continue, and that's why the Mayor and I have given a lot of focus to this, and I know that it's not just the Mayor and I think just every councillor here is concerned about that transport deficit that is likely to be glaringly lacking in some development areas as it stands at the moment. We need to do our damnedest, and we will, and you've heard it, commitment from our Plans and Places team, plus Auckland Transport. We need to find a way to resolve this. Let's not just, there's no intention to give up now, councillor. I'm not hearing any councillor at all, see the way. I've heard Councillor Henderson's viewpoint, but I think even Councillor Henderson knows in his Henderson ward that there are transport challenges. So look, we are absolutely determined to try and resolve this. And then we will put that through in our integrated planning instrument, through the plan change, and then it'll be tested. And there may be counter evidence on it as well. I would hope not. But look, you've heard today there's an absolute determination to resolve it. That's the best I can say right now. Lastly, Councillor Fletcher, please.
Thank you for that. I'm following on from what Councillor Watson has had to say. I don't believe this is just about the Mayor and yourself in terms of your submissions or your relationships with the government. This is absolutely fundamental to this being effective in achieving everybody's aims here. And I don't think, it certainly hasn't come back to the full council as a matter that we can advocate on. I'd like to know from officers what we might further to have effective communication and advocacy with both the government and the opposition on it, because it's just not good enough.
Thank you. You broke up a little bit there, but I think the question was, what can we do outside of just responding through the work we're doing now, correct? I think we may have lost your signal in
Yes, it is correct. Because ultimately it's in everyone's best interests. It's in everyone's best interest this is workable. And I would like the government and the opposition, for that matter, to hear from the full council. And
they are. So look, let me go to Chief of Strategy, please.
Thank you, through the chair. Just from an officer's perspective, we do work closely and provide feedback to our colleagues in central government and the various ministries. That's a certain level and a certain relationship that we have there. Clearly, as you suggest, Councillor Fletcher, there are other opportunities for you as politicians to meet face to face with your colleagues in central government. And that is, obviously as staff, we're happy to enable that for you. Otherwise, that sits with you as ultimately as a governing body, your decision on those.
Thank you. So, councillors, we are taking this seriously, okay, and that's why it's here. Okay, we're concluding the questions there. And now, councillors, I'd like to release...
So are we bringing that... So are we going to bring this back to the governing body for confirmation from everyone that we want this addressed by both the major political parties?
Look, we're pursuing this further, councillor. I'm not sure about your reference to the political parties. There's more than just two. But we're going to be workshopping this further, okay? So that's the 6th of... Yeah, just in a few weeks' time. So I'd like to release...
But we can't resolve it internally. That's what I've heard. What I'm suggesting is that we go out proactively to the government and the opposition and highlight the very real difficulties, the issues that we've heard about site-by-site assessment, the reality of what's going to happen in various areas if transport isn't a qualifying matter. I'm sorry if I sound quite passionate about this, but this will make or break this actually achieving the goals of the government and the opposition in passing this.
Thank you. Look, we'll pick that up. We'll have, Mayor, we can have a discussion about political approaches. Okay, I'd like to release Watercare and Auckland Transport and all the staff that have contributed so far. Members, I'm very conscious of individuals and taking care of them and making sure they're with their families or partners or whatever. So any objection to releasing the staff that we've heard from to date, and then we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll focus on special character. Okay, so we'll stand adjourned
Well,
for
Mr.
10
Chairman,
minutes.
I'm sorry if I'm labouring this, but it's not a political approach. It's a governance
Councillor,
approach.
you're
that I'm
really
wanting.
stretching it now. No, you're stretching it. We're moving on. And
Mr. Chairman, I've got one more question.
Councillor Simpson, can you pose that to the staff directly, please? Offline, please. Some of the staff have now dropped off. Okay, we're standing adjourned for 10 minutes and we'll come back at, 25 past 5, please.